My girlfriend and I booked an Airbnb in northern Michigan during the fall. The plan was to spend 4 days exploring small towns, hiking trails, and enjoying the colors before winter arrived. The rental was a small cabin near a lake. The listing looked perfect. The reviews were excellent. The host had been active for years. Everything seemed completely legitimate. The first thing that bothered me happened less than 10 minutes after we arrived. There were 2 vehicles parked outside. One was mentioned in the listing. The host's old pickup truck. The other wasn't. A dark blue SUV. At first, I assumed the host was there. Maybe doing maintenance. Maybe cleaning. But when I checked the reservation details, it specifically stated that guests would have the entire property to themselves. No shared spaces. No host on site. Nothing. I messaged the host. No response. Eventually, I convinced myself the SUV probably belonged to a neighbor. The cabin itself seemed normal. Clean kitchen, small living room, 2 bedrooms, a screened porch overlooking the lake. Everything looked exactly like the photos. By evening, I had forgotten about the SUV entirely, until dinner. Around 7 o'clock, my girlfriend opened the refrigerator, then immediately called my name. Inside were groceries. Not a few forgotten items. An entire week's worth of groceries. Milk, eggs, lunch meat, fruit, soda, several containers of leftovers. The refrigerator looked like someone was actively living there. We checked the reservation again. Entire property. No shared occupancy. No mention of another guest. Still no reply from the host. That night, we debated leaving, but it was getting late. The nearest hotel was nearly 40 minutes away. Eventually, we decided to stay one night and figure things out in the morning. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty. I walked into the kitchen and froze. One of the dining room chairs had been moved. I knew exactly where it had been before. Now it was facing the hallway. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I moved it. Maybe my girlfriend moved it. But the feeling stayed with me. Something wasn't right. The next morning, things became harder to ignore. The groceries were different, not gone. Different. The leftovers had moved. A carton of orange juice was suddenly half empty. And a pizza box we hadn't touched now sat open on the counter. My girlfriend looked genuinely frightened. She asked the question I had been avoiding. What if someone else has a key? That afternoon, the host finally replied. The message was strangely short. Property is private. Enjoy your stay. Nothing else. No explanation. No mention of the SUV. No mention of the groceries. Nothing. That night, we decided to lock every door and window before bed. I even placed a suitcase against the back door, just in case. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to a sound, a door closing. Not slamming, closing, softly. The kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to wake anyone. I immediately sat up. The cabin was silent. Then I heard footsteps. Slow footsteps, moving across the living room. My girlfriend heard them too. I could tell by the look on her face. Neither of us spoke. The footsteps stopped outside our bedroom. The silence that followed felt endless. Then a floorboard creaked. Directly outside the door, someone was standing there. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Not even one bar. The cabin Wi-Fi wasn't working either. For nearly 2 minutes, we sat there listening. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. A few seconds later, we heard another door open somewhere else in the cabin. Then silence. Complete silence. Neither of us slept again. As soon as daylight arrived, we searched the property. Every room, every closet, every cabinet. Nothing. Then I noticed something unusual behind the laundry room. A narrow door. Painted the same color as the wall. It looked almost hidden. The door wasn't locked. When I opened it, a set of wooden stairs descended into darkness. The listing had never mentioned a basement. The basement wasn't large, but someone had clearly been staying there. There was a mattress, blankets, water bottles, food wrappers, a portable heater, phone chargers, and several changes of clothes. My girlfriend immediately backed away. I remember feeling sick, not scared, sick. Because all the strange things suddenly made sense. The groceries, the footsteps, The moved furniture. The orange juice. Someone wasn't breaking into the cabin. Someone already lived there. We left immediately. But before driving away, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I checked the SUV. The vehicle was unlocked. Inside were clothes, fast food bags, maps of nearby hiking trails, and a notebook. Most of the notebook contained random entries, until the final pages. Those pages contained dates. Dozens of dates. Beside each date was a number. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I realized they were reservation dates, guest arrival dates, the same dates visible on the Airbnb calendar. Our arrival date was written on the final page. Next to it was a short note. Couple. Arrived 4:12 p.m. I dropped the notebook immediately. We drove straight into town and called police. The investigation that followed revealed something neither of us expected. The actual property owner lived in another state. He rarely visited. The Airbnb was managed by a local caretaker. That caretaker was the person who had been living in the basement. According to investigators, he had been staying there between reservations for months, possibly longer. The reason was never fully explained, but police believed he enjoyed watching guests without their knowledge, tracking their routines, listening to conversations, learning personal details. The worst part wasn't what happened while we were there. It was what investigators found afterward. Several guests had previously reported strange experiences. Missing food. Objects moved overnight. Footsteps. Doors opening. Yet none of those complaints had been taken seriously because nothing had ever been stolen. Nothing had ever been damaged. Until someone finally discovered the basement. Months later, I received an update from one of the detectives. The caretaker admitted to living beneath the cabin, but he denied entering guest areas, denied moving objects, denied watching anyone. The detective didn't believe him. Neither do I, because there is one detail I never told Airbnb. The morning after we heard the footsteps, before discovering the basement, I noticed something sitting on the kitchen counter. A photograph. Face down. At first, I assumed it belonged to the cabin. When I turned it over, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of my girlfriend and me unloading our luggage, taken from inside the trees across the driveway. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than 10 minutes after we arrived. Someone knew we were there before we even entered the cabin, and someone had been watching us from the very beginning. This happened 3 years ago during a road trip through Colorado. I was traveling alone and booking Airbnbs 1 or 2 nights at a time depending on where I ended up. Most of the trip was completely normal. Then I booked a cabin outside a small mountain town. Looking back, there were warning signs from the beginning. The biggest one was that the listing had almost no reviews. Not bad reviews. Just very few. The photos looked professional. The price was unusually cheap, and the host responded within seconds every time I sent a message. At the time, I thought I had found a great deal. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road surrounded by dense pine forest. There were no neighboring houses visible from the property. No streetlights. No businesses. Nothing. Just trees. The check-in instructions were simple. The key would be inside a lockbox near the front door. Everything worked exactly as described. The cabin itself looked clean. The furniture was older than the photos suggested, but otherwise nothing seemed unusual. I unpacked my bags, ordered food from a nearby restaurant, and settled in for the night. Around 8 p.m., I received a message through Airbnb. It was from the host. The message read, "Everything okay?" I replied that everything looked good. A few seconds later, another message arrived. "Glad you made it safely. Normal enough." Then another message. "Traveling alone?" I stared at the screen for a moment. That question felt strange, not threatening, just unnecessary. I didn't answer. Several minutes later, another message appeared. "No worries. Just making conversation." I ignored that one too. Around midnight, I went to bed. The cabin was completely silent. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds except occasional wind moving through the trees. At approximately 2 a.m., I woke up to a notification sound. The host had sent another message. "Are you awake?" That immediately irritated me. I turned off my phone and went back to sleep. The next morning, I drove into town for breakfast. While eating, I checked Airbnb. The host had sent 3 additional messages during the night. The final one read, "I thought I saw movement in the kitchen." That message stopped me cold. The host wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the property. I checked the listing again. Entire place. Private property. No shared occupancy. No host on site. I considered leaving right then. Instead, I messaged Airbnb support. They told me there was nothing obviously suspicious about the account. The host claimed to monitor the exterior security cameras. That explanation seemed reasonable, at least temporarily. When I returned to the cabin that afternoon, something felt wrong. The front door was slightly open, not wide open. Just enough for me to notice. I knew I had locked it. I specifically remembered checking it before leaving. I searched every room. Nothing appeared missing. Nothing looked disturbed. Eventually, I convinced myself I had simply forgotten. That evening, I decided to stay one more night. A decision I still regret. Around 10 p.m., another message arrived. "Nice weather today." I didn't respond. 5 minutes later, "Did you enjoy the diner?" I stared at the screen. The diner was where I had breakfast. I never mentioned it. Not in messages. Not online. Not to anyone. A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Sorry. Small town. People notice visitors." That explanation should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel worse. I locked every door and window. Then I placed a chair beneath the front door handle. Around 1:30 in the morning, I heard gravel crunch outside. A vehicle. Slowly approaching. The sound stopped near the cabin. I looked through the front window. A truck sat in the driveway. Its headlights were off. The engine remained running. I could not see the driver. For nearly 10 minutes, the truck didn't move. Then my phone vibrated. A new message. "Why are you looking through the window?" I felt my stomach drop. I stepped backward immediately. Another message arrived. "Relax." Then another. "I'm not going to hurt you." At that point, I called 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line while officers drove toward the property. The nearest unit was over 20 minutes away. The truck remained outside. Sometimes the engine idled. Sometimes it turned off. Several times, I heard footsteps moving around the cabin. At one point, someone tried the front door. The chair shifted slightly. Then the footsteps moved away. I spent the next 15 minutes sitting on the floor with a kitchen knife beside me while watching the front door. The moment police vehicles entered the driveway, the truck disappeared. Gone. Just gone. The officers searched the surrounding roads but never found it. When they checked the Airbnb listing, things became strange very quickly. The account information didn't match the property owner. In fact, according to county records, the actual owner had died almost 2 years earlier. His family believed the cabin had been vacant ever since. The Airbnb listing wasn't being operated by them. The photographs had been copied from an old real estate listing. The host profile was fake. The payment information was fake. Everything about the account was fake. The listing should not have existed. Airbnb removed it later that morning. The investigation revealed that several travelers had booked the same cabin over the previous year. Some reported odd messages. Some reported seeing vehicles nearby. A few left early. One guest reported hearing someone on the roof during the night, but nobody had reported enough evidence to trigger a serious investigation. The police never publicly identified the person behind the account. As far as I know, nobody was ever arrested. The strangest detail came months later. A detective contacted me with a follow-up question. He asked whether I had ever entered the locked utility room attached to the back of the cabin. I told him no. He then informed me that investigators found something inside. A folding chair. Several empty water bottles, a battery pack, and a notebook. The notebook contained reservation dates, vehicle descriptions, arrival times, and physical descriptions of guests, including me. Next to my name was a note. It read, "Arrived alone, stays up late, leaves curtains open." The detective believed whoever created the Airbnb listing was using it to lure travelers to an isolated property. Not to rob them, not to scam them, simply to watch them, to learn their routines. to observe them. The case was eventually closed due to lack of evidence. But there is one thing I still think about. A few weeks after the investigation ended, I searched for the old listing again. I expected it to be gone. Instead, I found something worse. The listing was active. Different host name. Different photos. Different title. Same cabin. Same location. The account disappeared less than a day later, but it was there. Long enough for me to see it. Long enough to realize someone was still trying to rent that cabin to strangers. And somewhere out there, another traveler may have thought they were getting a great deal on a quiet weekend in the mountains. The first red flag appeared before I even arrived. At the time, I ignored it. About a year ago, my friend Nate and I planned a weekend hiking trip in northern Tennessee. Hotels in the area were expensive, so we ended up booking an Airbnb about 20 minutes outside a small town. The property looked normal enough. A 2-story farmhouse surrounded by trees. The listing had dozens of reviews and a host named Sarah. Every message from the host was polite and professional. The only strange thing was that Sarah never answered any direct questions. Whenever I asked something specific, the replies felt copied and pasted. I remember asking whether anyone lived nearby. The response came back almost instantly. Guests have complete privacy during their stay. That wasn't what I asked. But I didn't think much about it. The house was located at the end of a long gravel road. By the time we arrived, it was already getting dark. The property looked exactly like the listing photos. The front porch light was on. The key was inside a lockbox. Everything seemed normal, at least for the first hour. While unpacking, Nate noticed several framed family photos sitting on a shelf in the living room. The pictures showed the same woman in every photo, a woman in her 40s. Different locations, different years, different people around her. We assumed it was the host. That seemed completely normal. Then we found another photo upstairs. Same woman, different frame, different room. Again, nothing unusual. Until later that night. Around 10 o'clock, we drove into town for food. The cashier at a gas station asked where we were staying. When we mentioned the address, his expression changed immediately. He asked, "That old farmhouse?" I said yes. The guy stared at us for a moment. Then he said, "I thought that place was empty." Before we could ask anything else, another customer walked in and interrupted the conversation. The cashier never brought it up again. On the drive back, Nate joked that maybe we'd rented a haunted house. Neither of us actually believed that. By midnight, we were both in separate bedrooms upstairs. The house was completely silent. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds except the wind outside. Then I heard footsteps. Not upstairs, downstairs. Slow footsteps. Moving across the hardwood floor. At first, I assumed Nate was awake. I texted him, "You downstairs?" His response arrived immediately. "No." I sat upright. Then another message appeared. "Dude, I hear it too." The footsteps continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Neither of us slept much after that. The next morning, we searched the house. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry. No open doors. No explanation. That afternoon, we went hiking. When we returned, something felt wrong immediately. The front door was unlocked. I knew for a fact we locked it. Inside, the house looked untouched. But one thing had changed. The framed photos were gone. Every single one. The shelves were empty. The walls were empty. Even the upstairs photos had disappeared. Nate noticed it before I did. He just stood there staring at the empty wall. What happened to the pictures? I didn't have an answer. We checked the Airbnb listing. None of those photos appeared in the listing images. It was as if they had never existed. That night, things got worse. Around 2 a.m., both of us woke up to the sound of a vehicle outside. Headlights swept across the bedroom wall, then disappeared. I looked through the window. A truck was parked near the tree line. Its lights were off. Someone was sitting inside, watching the house. For nearly 20 minutes, the truck never moved. Then it slowly backed away and disappeared into the darkness. The following morning, I finally called the host. No answer. I called again. No answer. I sent messages through Airbnb. Nothing. Then I tried something else. I searched public property records. What I found made my stomach drop. The property wasn't owned by Sarah. It hadn't been owned by anyone named Sarah. In fact, the listed owner was a man who had died 3 years earlier. I thought maybe the records were outdated. Then I found an old local news article. The farmhouse had been vacant since the owner's death. Vacant. 3 years. That evening, we decided to leave early. Before packing, I called Airbnb support. While explaining the situation, I happened to mention the family photos. The representative interrupted me. "What photos?" I explained again. "The photos of the woman. The ones all over the house." There was a long pause. Then she said something that still gives me chills. "Sir, there are no photos visible in any inspection photos we have on file." At that moment, Nate walked into the room. His face had gone completely pale. He was holding one of the upstairs dresser drawers. Inside the drawer was a stack of photographs. Dozens of them, all showing different Airbnb guests. Inside the farmhouse, sleeping, watching television, eating dinner. Some appeared completely unaware they were being photographed. Then we found photos of ourselves, taken the previous day. One from outside the living room window. One from the backyard. One taken through an upstairs bedroom window. Someone had been watching the house. Not years ago. Recently. Very recently. We packed our things and left immediately. Police searched the property later that night. Nobody was found. The Airbnb listing disappeared within 48 hours. The account belonging to Sarah vanished too. Months later, investigators discovered that the entire host profile had been created using stolen information. The woman from the family photos was real, but she wasn't the host. She had no connection to the property. Her photos had been taken from social media accounts and printed. Nobody ever identified who was actually running the Airbnb. Nobody ever identified who took the photographs. And the detail that still bothers me most, it happened 6 months later. I received a plain white envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the farmhouse from a distance. Standing on the front porch were Nate and me. The timestamp matched the weekend we stayed there. Written on the back in black marker were 4 words. "Thanks for visiting.